Welcome to Outlaw Woodworking. Recently I took some scrap 2x4s and I made this little end table for out here on my patio. For the longest time I used this cheap plastic fold up camping table, which was fine, but this I really had a good time making this, and it's all made out of 2x4s, epoxy top. I routed the inside and put some seashells in the inside of the star. And let me show you how I made it. The first thing I do is take some random scrap 2x4s and cut them down to the size that I want for the table. And I needed I was going to make it a thick table, so I got enough pieces to do an 18 inches wide table. And I then take them to the joiner and plane them all down. I then decide to start on the legs first. So I use my jet mortiser and I mortise 4 pieces to accept tenons for these legs that I'm going to make for this table. Once I get the mortises done, I measure how wide I want the legs, and then I cut a piece on the chop saw. I then take it over to the table saw and I cut the thickness of the tenon. I would just rip it all the sides on my table saw for both of these pieces. I then take it over to the bandsaw and cut the ends so that I have a nice clean tenon. And that's a pretty simple way for me to do them. I then take that middle piece. I wanted the reveal to be a little smaller, so I rip both sides of it down a little bit and then take it over to the router, and I router all the pieces of the legs. Once I get all the pieces of the legs routed, I finish by sanding them on my rigid sander. I like that new sander that I got. After I get them all cleaned up on the sander, I take them over and I get them glued up. And these each have a single tenon in each one, so I just have 2 to glue. Get them set in there nice and tight, and then clamp them. I have fun. It's fun to make stuff out of nothing, even if they're just a fun little like this is just a little end table, but it's fun to make. And when you're done, you got something, and you started out with just some scrap wood. So once I get these clamped down, then I need to start working on the table. So I run all 4 sides of these 2x4s through the joiner. I think there's about 10 pieces, and I get those glued up. The next day, I need to surface this table. So I get out, I have a surfacer that I made for my router. I get a surfacing bit and I surface this whole little slab here. I should have been wearing a mask right there. When you're surfacing, it's really dusty, but I ended up, it's never too late, so I go and get one in a minute. Yeah, there. I finally got smart and put the mask on. Anyway, I surfaced both sides of this little table. Then I take it and I sand. I sand it all nice and smooth with a couple different grits. I think I went up to 220. I need to cut it, square it up a little bit. So I used my Bigfoot beam saw, and that worked really nice for squaring this up. That's a nice saw. Cuts really straight too. Then I sand the ends, get them sanded really good, both sides. I then take this whole table over here and run it through the router, all sides of it. Top, bottom, corners. I just router everything. I love having a router lift right in my workbench. It's really handy, and I'm very lucky to have that. Once I get this all routed, then I proceed to, I decided to make this kind of fun, so I'm going to stain this whole top blue. And I had the stains, so I either had blue or red or dark walnut or something like that. So I thought this would be kind of a fun color, and it'll probably eventually go in my daughter's room as a nightstand. So I paint this whole thing blue and let it dry. It's kind of a fun color. After I get it all stained blue, I I go I go back to work on the legs. And now that they're all glued and dried, I sand those, get all the glue off, and start figuring out. I need to make another piece for the center and a way of mounting them onto the table. So I get all the glue sanded off of these legs, and I was a little sloppy when I glued these up. There was actually quite a bit of glue on them. It's a lot easier if you wait about an hour and then you take your little plastic gluing tool and just scrape. You can scrape it off like rubber, but if you wait too long, like I did, then it's really hard. So take it off when it's not so hard. A lot easier. Anyway, I sand these legs down really nice. And then I decide how big I want the actual footprint of the legs to be. And then I go over and chop 3 pieces. 2 of them will be mounting pieces for the top of it. I set the stop block up and I cut them in, 2 pieces exactly the same size. And then I needed to run them through the joiner, make them nice and clean. I rip all the sides of them. I have 2 that are going to be for the mounting, and then I made another one that I'm going to kind of do a little piece for the down below to join the 2 legs down below, give it a little more support. Here I router all the corners of the pieces, or 4 sides anyway. On this longer piece, I actually router all sides of it because it's going to be exposed. And what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to, that centerpiece, I'm going to notch it and put it in there. First thing I have to do is on the top pieces, I'm going to put some pocket screws. That'll make those easier to mount on there. And it makes for a nice tight joint if you glue them. So I drill pocket holes in the 2 top pieces. And then I get these top pieces glued on first. Working with pocket screws is really nice. It's really easy. They're just easy to deal with. So I clamp this and then I screw it off with the pocket screws. This is a really simple little end table. It's just fun to do stuff, and I love making stuff even if it's simple. So I get the 2 mounting pieces screwed off to the top, and then I start to figure out how I want this bottom piece to look. And I kind of wanted to just notch it and have it sitting on top of there. So I figure out the dimension of the top, and then I mark it on the bottom. And I figure out where I'm going to cut this. Once I have that figured out as far as the width of the bottom and the notches that I'm going to make and how deep I'm going to make them, I transfer those marks to the side, and then I take it over to the bandsaw and I start to cut that out. I got a new blade in the bandsaw right now. It's a carbide 3-tooth per inch blade, and it really is working good. It's 1/2 inch carbide bit, 3-tooth per inch, but it is really working really nice, very clean. Anyway, I take this piece and I glue that in the center, and that I thought it gave it kind of a little bit of a unique look. And I I get the dimension, I glue it, and then I shoot 2 nails in it, and that does it for that. I then stain the whole thing. I wanted to give the bottom a little bit of a unique color to it, so I stained the whole bottom with I think it was an oak color. It was just some stain I had laying around, so I just started using it. So I just put 1 coat of stain on this whole thing. I figured that was enough. And once I get the whole thing stained, I'm pretty sloppy too. Um, However, it did. Once you get it all on there, you can go back and clean it all up with a rag. So after I get that whole thing stained, then it needs to dry. So now I go back. Now I go to work on the tabletop. While the legs are drying, I mark out the star and I draw a big star on the center of this table. I got a new stencil for stars, and what I did was I just transferred the pattern and made it bigger on this um, on this table. I then take my Dremel and I do the outline with the 107 bit with the Dremel. This is a pretty big star. I think I don't know, it's at least 12 inches by 12-inch star. So I carve the whole outer line with the Dremel, and that takes a little while, so you kind of just have to relax and just get in there and did it. Once I just put some music on and put the earphones on and just start carving. I'm gonna have to quit doing these stars. The last 3 things I've made, I put stars in them. I'm getting a little carried away. Anyway, I carve the whole outline with this Dremel, get a nice groove in there, and then once I have the whole outline done, I switch to I have a small handheld porter cable right there, and I switch to that, and I put in a 1/2 inch bit, and I'm setting the depth at about a 1/2 inch deep, and I start carving the whole inside of this star out with the router. And the reason is I had this crazy idea that my daughter had some seashells that she had got from the beach, and I thought it would be cool to epoxy these seashells inside of this star. So I got the room temperature up to 75 degrees for doing epoxy. I then get everything laid out and set this little table up to put some seashells inside there. I get these seashells and I basically take the ones that'll lay flat in there and I just spread them out inside this star. There was actually barely enough to even put in there, but it worked out okay. I then mix up some super clear tabletop epoxy, and that was actually the last of my epoxy. So it worked out. It worked out pretty good, although I think I am going to sand this table and put another coat on later on. I get it all mixed up, and the room temperature right now is 76 degrees. And yeah, it's perfect temperature for this particular epoxy. I then fill the star up first, and then I just slowly pour this thing around the star until it goes over the edge. I then torch it, get all the bubbles out of it, which in scrap wood, that wasn't easy. These bubbles kept coming back, and they did give me trouble. That's why I think later on I'm going to have to give it one more coat down the road, sand it, and put one more coat on it just to get rid of some of the, even though I torched it like 10 times, there was a couple that the next morning when I woke up, there was a few bubbles in it. I then take after the epoxy table's done, I then take and put 5 coats of polyurethane on the table legs. And basically I just slop on this polyurethane, and then Once I put it all on, you go back and then wipe off the runs, and it dries perfectly clear, and it looks pretty good. I think in the future I'm going to get a little sprayer and rig up something where I can spray them, because I think it'd be a lot easier. Anyway, I put these multiple coats of polyurethane on the legs, and that takes a little while. Actually, it's about an hour between coats, so every hour you can throw a coat on it. So it took me I guess about 5 hours to finish up the legs with all this polyurethane. You can see I'm pretty sloppy putting it on, but I go back through, after I get it all on, I go back through and I wipe off all those little runs, and it ends up drying really nice. But I do think a sprayer would be a lot easier. Once the legs are all done and the top's all done, I then set up the tabletop, and I need to sand off the little nipples from the epoxy on the bottom. So I get those sanded off, which didn't take very long. This is on the bottom of the table. So I'm basically sanding off the little epoxy drips off the bottom of the table. Once I get these all sanded off, I don't want to leave the wood raw on the bottom. So I put a coat of polyurethane on the bottom of the table and then let that dry. Once both pieces are dry, I take it over and I pilot hole some screw holes, and then I put some hex lags in the bottom of this table. I then take some rubber pads and glue them to the bottom of the legs. Thanks for watching Outlaw Woodworking. I really enjoyed making this little end table, and it was just fun to make out of a bunch of scrap. You know, you can make stuff. You don't have to have, you know, fancy wood and stuff. You can do fun projects just with some cheap wood. This was some 2x4s that they were just all different random sizes, and I chopped them up and made this table. And I think it's a fun little table. And anyway, thank you for watching. Subscribe if you want to. Like the video if you want to. Ring the bell if you want to. Anyway, thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you next time.